meaningful discussion. They're about raising awareness about mental health and performance, and also sharing tools and strategies to support players, coaches, and support teams so that you can manage the demands of life on tour. So, my name is Damon Valentino, and I'm the Director of Mental Fitness at the PTPA. And I'm excited to serve as the moderator for our panelists. So, before we get started, I want to encourage you to grab a pen and paper and prepare to jot down any insights or any questions that you may have along the way. You may also want to pause for a moment right now and just think about what inspired you to make it a priority to join our session today. Now, as you prepare to kick off your 2025 season, I want to send you all an open invitation to reach out to me if you feel like I might be able to be of service for you. I'm here as a resource for you, and I really want to learn more about what you need. I'm willing to be able to share our services, and if there are any other services or resources that I can direct you towards, please feel free to be in touch. So, turning about today, today's session is all about women's health and performance education. And our mission at the PTPA is to safeguard and support men's and women's tennis players worldwide. We're committed to shining a light on areas within the professional tennis culture that deserve more attention. And we could make a case that research, education, and training strategies for the female tennis players is just beginning to get the attention it deserves. So we're proud to kick off our Mental Health and Performance Summit by specifically focusing on our female professional players and the coaches and teams that support you. So I'd like to turn to today's panel, which is partly responsible for bringing some of that much needed attention into the light. First, we have Dr. Robby Sikka. Dr. Sikka is the medical director at the PTPA, and additionally, he serves as the CEO and founder of Smart. It's a healthcare company that uses artificial intelligence, personalized analytics, and clinical connectivity to help patients get healthier across the globe. They've built the world's largest sports injury database and help organizations like the PTPA and global tennis players understand how sports are evolving and how we can best understand individual players' risks. His work has been featured in CNN, ESPN, CNBC, Forbes, and Sports Illustrated, among others. Welcome, Robby. Also, we have Jenny Noiles, Senior Performance Specialist at EXOS. Jenny has worked with a variety of professional athletes, primarily in the NHL and the MLB, high school and collegiate athletes as well. Jenny has managed facilities and directed relationships, notably Mayo Clinic and Kaiser Performance. And Jenny specializes in return to performance. And currently, Jenny sits on the continuous improvement team, bringing education and mentorship to EXOS coaching staff. Jenny is a key stakeholder and contributor to EXOS's Women's ARC work, the team specifically dedicated to researching, studying, and collaborating with industry experts on health, wellness, and performance, and experience of women high performers and athletes. In Jenny's spare time, she continues to play soccer and is a USTA 3.5 tennis player. Not bad for only playing for 4 years. Welcome, Jenny. And then finally, we have Dr. Christy Fernandez-Cull. Dr. Fernandez-Cull is the CEO of Vinci Wearables and former leader of sensing teams at Waymo, the Google self-driving, and Lyft's self-driving division. She played a key role at Apple, contributing to autonomous systems and releasing the first LiDAR module in the 2020 iPad. Dr. Fernandez-Cull has experience in defense technologies at MIT Lincoln Laboratory and consumer products at Apple. She advises VCs and startups in mobility, autonomous vehicles, and digital health, and serves on several boards. She holds a PhD from Duke University and an MBA from MIT and lectures at Columbia University and MIT. So I want to start by thanking our presenters for taking the time to address our women players, coaches, and support teams. And for those of you who are in attendance today, we're in for a real treat. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Robby Sikka to present our first panel presentation for the day. Take it away, Robby.
Thanks, Damon, and thanks to everybody for joining and to our other panelists for contributing today. And I think really in the spirit of women's health and collaboration, this is going to take a village. It's going to take everybody working together to really improve global health and recognize the issues that are going on. I want to be respectful of time, so I'm going to jump in here with um, a little bit of data that we've put together between our collaboration with PTPA and SMART to really understand what are the factors that are driving player health, both on the men's and women's side, but really emphasizing today as we discuss some of the particular aspects that are impacting the women's tour, and understand how did we get here and where are we going to go from there. And we think we've identified four real primary factors that are impacting player health broadly across the tour. The first is that there's a changing age of a typical top 100, top 200, top 400 tennis player. And that change has been going on for the last 20 years, and it's important to understand where we're at physically because that has an impact on the types of injuries that we're seeing and the age that we're seeing those injuries that are really, really impacting players. The second is the workload. And workload can be different for different players. If you're a singles player, if you're a doubles player, if you're playing in more tournaments, more matches, if you're a top 100 player. But the reality is to play on the tour is harder than ever. Just like to play in the NBA or to play in the NFL, there are new physical requirements, but the speed and the velocity of the game are significantly changing. Number three, schedule. We know that the schedule has had an impact, so we went and did a deep dive over the last 7 years worth of data to understand how has the schedule changed. In a post-COVID world, how has the schedule changed and how does that impact injuries? And the fourth is really, as we talked about with workload, how is the game changing? How is the game itself, the equipment, and the other parts of the game impacting an individual player? And then this goes back to some of the things that Damon talked about. We live in a population that's more educated about health than ever before. But this is also the least educated population about health compared to what we will see in the future. We're learning every day. There's unique personalized factors that matter to you. If you're a 39-year-old player with a groin strain, it's different than if you're a 23-year-old player with that same injury. Your mindset, your philosophy, your life experiences, they're all different. Those personalized factors all impact return to play, and they all impact what your decisions are. Our goal with the PTPA is to really use data to help offer solutions. So you may have seen some of this information through some of the news media that we've done, as well as some of the social media that the PTPA has put out. But the reality is the average age on the tour is significantly increasing. And for women's players, it's really, really increasing. It's increased by more than 10% over the last 20 years. And so when we look at the average player in the top 100 for the for the WTA, we now see players who are not in their early 20s, but are in their mid 20s. And what that means for a young player is you are playing against players who are potentially up to 10 years on average older than you. That has a real impact on the physical requirements for a young player to break into the tour. It also means that it's taking longer for players to break into the top 100. That grueling life that you have in your early 20s and late teens to get into the top 100 is really, really hard. We don't expect this to change. Once you've gone this far and you've seen this trend uh, extend for as long as it has, it may dip down just a little bit, but you're not going to see a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds that are permeating the top 100. You will see older players because we are extending careers. We now see more players playing into their mid 30s. That has an impact. The health issues that a 30-year-old has are different than the health issues that a 17-year-old has. In addition to that, it means that the wear and tear of what you are sustaining when you are 17 and 20 are going to play a role in what injuries you have when you are 30 and 35. So the age of the tour is extending, and we are seeing players play longer into their mid 30s in some scenarios. That has an impact because if you're a 35-year-old playing against a 17-year-old, that is a very, very different scenario than what we would see in the early 2000s, where most players were in their early 20s. Number two, and this is probably one of the more important slides. The volume of work is substantially higher. A three-set match is really four sets if you go back and look in time. Playing three sets today is like playing four sets in 1999. Playing five sets in the men's tour is like playing six sets. That means for the women's tour, for the WTA, virtually every match is like playing four sets now. That has an impact. That is really, really important to remember that matches take longer, and the longer the matches go, the higher the injury rate. 122 matches for matches with injuries compared to 109 minutes for matches with no injuries. The more matches you play, 461 minutes played in average minutes played per tournament compared to 343 minutes played. That difference there is about 25%. If you have that extra 25%, you are more likely to get hurt. And we are seeing this across all Grand Slams, across all majors. It's not just because there's more TV timeouts. It's not because there's longer rallies. The matches themselves are just taking longer. And this is despite all of the things that they have with different clocks and different tracking that they use. The matches are getting longer and they are getting more grueling. Where this is going is, and you'll hear about this from one of our other panelists, we are seeing more distance being covered. The points are longer, but the points are harder. Every point is more stressful. And this goes to something that Damon can probably allude to. The mental health components of this are really, really important. Everything is more stressful in this modern world that we have. Okay. There's no breaks. We have phones and stimulation constantly. And where it gets interesting is when we talk about fatigue and scheduling. The rate of night matches is substantially increasing, and this is because of the media. We know this is because of TV deals. We know this is because of broadcasting partners and them wanting eyes on our tour. But night matches where you have to sit around all day increase your risk for injury. We live in a world where the US Open still plays until 3 or 4 in the morning, and matches still start at midnight sometimes. In this scenario, we have to understand that there is a greater risk. There is a 20% higher risk of getting hurt in a night match versus a day match. We have to do better at protecting players and making sure that you understand you have a choice. We will advocate for you at the PTPA. We will make sure that you are not alone, but that we understand this data and we want to empower you. As we talked about, the game is changing. The ball, we talk a lot about the impact of different balls and ball manufacturers, and we're working on that to understand which ball manufacturers potentially put greater arm and elbow risk on players. But we really want to understand is in baseball, and I'm sure Jen and the folks at EXOS can allude to this, because we probably see some of the same things in softball, but not to the same degree. But the plague of elbow injuries in baseball is largely due to the increased velocity. We are seeing Tommy John surgery now on the pro tennis tour. That has a substantial implication on the future of tennis because we are seeing so much emphasis on spin rate and velocity, and that is across the ATP and WTA. We're not going to change the game. We're not going to remove power from the game. What we do need to understand is how do we make it safer for the long run, and how do we help improve the things on the WTA so that we can take it down to developmental tennis. We talked about what age and what tournaments. We'll actually we can go through maybe later if people are interested which tournaments are some of the highest risk tournaments. But the impact of the schedule. We know that on the WTA side, the highest risk age for injuries is in the late 20s. That continues to increase, and then it gets a little bit better after that, and we see a slight bump there after 31, 32 as well. But in general, the peak risk for players is in their late 20s. We know that longer recovery periods correlate with lower injury rates. We need to have longer recovery periods between tournaments and between matches. There is a strong correlation between injury rates and the absolute age of patients. We need to have flexible tournament schedules that introduce rest periods when you arrive that give you the opportunity to have something that allows you to maintain your body for the grueling, really 12-month tennis season. We know that the average total matches for the top 200 on the women's side is increasing. For the top 100, it's actually slightly decreasing, but for that group that's trying to break in, they are playing more matches. And because they are playing more matches, there are higher risks. Finally, our call to action. The game is changing, and our players are too, and we have to respect that. We have to modernize the schedule and the demands on players to improve the broader health of players. The top three of the top five causes for match withdrawal are back pain, illness, and core muscle injuries on the women's tour. And that's really, really important to remember that those three things are largely preventable. We have to understand the needs of the modern athlete as the game changes, and we have to understand that we have to work together to actually advocate for players. I'll stop there and I'll take some questions and then turn it over to our other speakers.
Thank you, Robby. Do we have any questions? I'm also happy to ask them if you want to put anything in the chat. And Anastasia?
Yeah, hi. This is probably more of a comment than a question, but Robby, you mentioned that age is obviously going up the players on tour, and I think for women specifically, that means that there are probably more moms as we're seeing that now. And the comment that I basically just wanted to make, obviously, when you have a baby, to for you to come back on tour is going to be very different than from coming back from an injury. And I think once again, there's information that's kind of lacking and the support that's lacking on the WT currently that I think we kind of need to do a better job at educating coaches and player support teams and supporting these women to come back to professional tennis. So that's just kind of a comment I wanted to make as I'm seeing more moms on tour, which is great, but I think we just need to be able to support them as well.
I completely agree, Anastasia. The unique factors of being a female on the tennis tour are not just the maternal side. I mean, look, there's a lot of players that are moms. There's a lot of players that think they want to be moms and they don't know who to go to and who to talk to. And we need to communicate and give players access to those resources so that when they're ready to become a mom, that they have access to whatever fertility care that they need or whatever maternal care that they need. But then making sure that, they have access to nursing facilities or other things at the tournament sites is really, really important. Like we have to make sure that we provide the family support for these players across the board, understanding that um, players are more likely to become moms on the tour now that we're playing into your mid 30s.
Robby, a question for you. What would be the first domino, would you say, that needs to fall to sort of like stimulate these changes to become actualized?
I think we're working really hard the first thing was understanding what's going on the tour and what's changed. I think we now understand after the first year here working together what's gone on over the last 20 years. Okay, um, there's more specificity on what types of injuries are occurring, where they're occurring. We understand which tournaments are the highest risk. I didn't put those slides out because I know we're working on cleaning up some data, but ultimately, we can't be playing matches until 3 in the morning. Okay, the U.S. Open is the highest risk tournament out there. We can't be playing matches till 3 in the morning. That's just unacceptable. Look, the mystique of, hey, it was great. We were all there until 3 in the morning. That was cool 30 years ago. That's not good for the players. It's not good for the fans. It's not good for the staff. We have to protect players and we have to advocate for players. So now we have data to back it up. Night matches are higher risk. Players are playing longer matches. Velocity is going up. Players are older. Back pain, back pain associated with sitting around waiting for a night match all day. Those are just unacceptable. So we can do a lot with just that. Now we need to speak up and we need to say, all right, practically, what can we do? How can we structure a schedule? Is there, are there things that we can do to organize and what do the players want? So now, after sharing this data, ultimately, I think the real next domino is to ask the players, okay, knowing this, what do you want? What's your goal? And we can use everything from AI to, more data analysis to give them, here are your choices, here are your options, to come up with practical solutions.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions for Robby before we turn it over to Jenny? So feel free again, as I said at the beginning, if you do have any questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate and get these questions to the right people. Robby, thank you so much for everything you're doing for Inside the Game, and thank you for taking the time today. As I mentioned at the outset, Jenny works at EXOS and has specifically been working inside of what EXOS calls a women's arc work. And I'm really excited to hear what some of that data that Robby shared, what are we doing on the ground for understanding a little bit more about, as she says here, the game plans and female physiology. Jenny, thank you so much. Take it away.
Yeah, so maybe Damon, just a quick thumbs up. You can see my screen, right? Okay, perfect. I know it's what was the saying? Oh, that was so 2020 when you would start talking on a Zoom call and you'd still be on mute. I'm very human, and so things like that happen. I have a crazy weird headset because I have a very loud dog and I'm at home today. So at any point, if you can't hear me, you can't see me, please just speak up. But yeah, Robby, that was fascinating. As Damon said, I am a newbie. I am new to tennis. I'm going to show you guys some data, some exciting data for individuals that are 30 plus. So I'm in my 40s, and I discovered tennis myself personally playing just a few years ago, and I love it. So with that, just to get started. I'm a fairly excitable person. I can talk a lot. So I've already started my timer just to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time. But just a really, really big thank you. For me, I've been in the coaching industry for about 17 years now. It does not feel like it. Had really high aspirations to work in the NFL. Years later, I had the opportunity to do that within the private setting. And for myself, just as the years have gone by, it's just become really important to me to give back to women's sports from the youth level all the way up. So I mean it sincerely. This is just a wonderful opportunity for myself to speak with you, and hopefully this is the first of many. Um, I'm sometimes called Captain Obvious with my teammates. This is very obvious to many of you on the call because you are living this tennis world. So just a moment of reflection. I understand that I'm going to be sharing some newer information with you, and probably you're thinking, "What the heck? Where am I going to take this and place this? How is this going to fit into my reality?" So just a moment of reflection, knowing that preseason starts mid-December. Air quotes off season, late November. You might, be laughing at me right now saying, well, Jenny, we don't even call it an off season. Tournaments 52 weeks of the year. Like, holy cow. I've worked with a lot of athletes, and this is your profession, this is your life, this is your love. Man, you guys work really hard, and I've worked with a number of different sports, and again, doing my own research into the professional tennis circuit. You definitely are high up there in terms of the annual demand on your body, mindset, and time. So again, thank you for being here today, or tuning in later. Um, my quick call out. We're going to be diving into some female physiology. Everyone on this call, perhaps you're interested because you yourself are a female. Maybe you are someone that works with female athletes. Maybe you're in charge of player health. Maybe you're just really, really curious about what's unique to a female, and then heck, what's unique to a female athlete, specifically a tennis player. Um, we're not going to go super, super deep. We're going to introduce some principles and concepts. How I look at it, I'm a very simple person myself. We're just trying to get to the start line. Let's start with some concepts, have some good conversation around it. Then we can start to look at, okay, well, Jenny just taught me a lot about, the menstrual cycle, gave me some ideas of how to integrate that into my training schedule. Where do I start? And we'll definitely point you in those directions. I'm a storyteller, so chances are I'm going to reference some of my own experiences being a female, being a former collegiate soccer player, and myself still, as I mentioned earlier, in my early 40s, still, I would say, compete at a high level. I still travel nationally to play in soccer tournaments and tennis tournaments because that's just has always been my identity. My personal relationship with the menstrual cycle, I probably grew up in an era where you just didn't talk about it. So for some of you that might resonate with you, like, hey, I'm not really comfortable about talking about this. Let me take the awkwardness from it. You're not having to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it for you. Okay. All right. I always like to start with a really great quote from Dr. Stacy Sims, an individual that's really making strides in the industry in regards to women's health, women's physiology, also an Ironman endurance elite athlete herself. Um, Women aren't small men. I'm just going to open with that. We're going to start really broad and then we're going to narrow things down. At this point in time, this statement can mean a lot of different things for one person, but a lot of different things for everyone on the call. So part of this is just, okay, we're here to talk about women. We're going to talk about female physiology. And again, just start to think about what does that statement mean to you currently? And potentially at the end of this, how does your relationship with this statement, women aren't small men, potentially change or evolve? So again, I'm a little bit of a storyteller. So I find numbers really interesting. And so I don't want to just take this with a grain of salt, but like Robby said, there's just a lot of attention and information. We're almost inundated with information around women specific, you name it, X. So for me, this is more, again, just painting the story about leadership in sport, right? If we specifically look at high achieving women, in the workforce, right? So 80% of Fortune 500 female executives played some kind of competitive sport, either in high school or college. Pretty strong statistic. 94% of women in C-suites positions also played competitive sports. So again, the key here is we're looking not necessarily at causation, but a relationship here of young women spending their time doing sports and the impact that it has later in life from their leadership and just professional development. 69% of women who earn more than $100,000 per year in our leadership roles played collegiate athletics, right? So even there, right? So my parents were not athletes. Uh, it was always school first, but they respected the fact that their daughter loved everything about sports. So I wish I had these numbers to share with them in my younger years. But again, we're looking at, hey, sports matters. What we learn on the tennis court, on the soccer pitch, in our review of our game footage, match footage. It's all excellent time spent. What's also interesting, and then this kind of aligns with what Robby was saying, just the average age is increasing, on the tour. But to me, this was really interesting because I am one of these statistics, right? Participation in sport by women has steadily increased generationally. So I was really impressed to see all the way from 30s to 80s, women are still participating in sports. So I think in the 80s it was around, 5 years of participation on average, 37 years. What's interesting, though, in comparison to the data that Robby showed from a professional perspective, when I say professional, just someone being a professional athlete doing it for a living. Again, this is looking more at the rec side of things. Women in their 20s is the one exception where this increase has actually, there's been more of a decrease in the average years of participation. So again, we're just storytelling here. Um, But then for me, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? So a lot of my personal time spent is, volunteering and giving back to youth organizations because they are the future, right? We're hoping that this presentation today and all the presentations this week can impact you individually in your career. But also it's this mindset of how do you pay it forward for the incoming generations, making it better for them. But there is a participation gap in sports between girls and boys. So the Women's Sports Foundation surveyed 3,000 girls and boys. From that survey, they found that 36.4% of girls are participating in sports within that age of 7 to 17, while there's a larger number of boys in a similar age range participating in sports. More girls are playing sports, but numbers falls as girls get older. So we really see an acceleration in the dropout rate around age 16, and then it really accelerates 17, 18, within those teen years. So we're looking at within that age range, 1 in 5 leave at this time. The positive, though, is girls that have, started early participating in organized sports tend to stay longer. So then, if we look at this again, comparing boys and girls in a similar age, 36% of girls in the same age range of boys are dropping out versus 30% of boys, right? So again, the picture's just growing here. So, in this survey, when asked why they dropped out of sports, here are some of the reasons. 1 in 3 felt it was too big of a time commitment. 1 in 3 either had a serious injury or just general fatigue. It was detracting from other areas in their life, more than likely school. 1 in 5 stated that just the cost of athletics now in high school or middle school can be expensive. 1 in 10 worry they are not good enough. All right, so that's I'm sure Damon would have something to say about that, and I know the presenters tomorrow will be talking a little bit more about mental health and mindset. But yeah, to me, that's really interesting that someone would quit because they don't think they're good enough, right? Maybe I was just too cocky and too proud growing up. Um, but looking at this, again, a few more statistics. 2 in 5 girls say comments about their appearance, religious attire, negatively impact their participation. Part of this, we're not going to dive into it, but just interestingly, just looking at access to sports and opportunities. If we look at 1.3 million fewer opportunities that high school girls have in comparison to their male counterparts. All right, so here's where we're starting to narrow our focus. All right, so regardless of your relationship with the menstrual cycle, nearly half of girls surveyed, right, age 13 to 18, felt as though their menstrual cycle negatively influenced their participation in sport and physical activity. 50%, right? We can't shy away from that, right? Um, so what can happen? What do we do? Right. So we look at this 50% of individuals, maybe potentially they don't have access, to pads, tampons. Maybe their symptoms are impacting their want and desire to participate. We can't get rid of the menstrual cycle. It's a biological fact, right? So then how do we constructively, and I don't want to say easily, but how do we deal with it? All right. Going back again, though, to that comment of women are not small men, there's just a couple of things that I want to highlight here. All right, even though the menstrual cycle is a biological fact, myself and the team that I work on, and again, this isn't just, EXOS knows this, this is, a statistic again that's really been in our face over the last couple of years is, despite this biological fact, only 4 to 6% of performance research studies have included people with female physiology. So again, I know there's a lot of coaches on the call, and I'm sure some athletes that maybe have a kinesiology background. But again, when you think about the number of research studies around strength and conditioning, I've read a lot over the years, but I guess I just never really paid attention to the subject pool. More often than not, the research is dominated by male athletes or participants. And so again, all of us, Robby, Damon, Anastasia, everyone on this call, right? We seek to understand the individual in front of us. Well, right now, if I'm looking at a female tennis player or a female athlete, I can't ignore the fact that what's also unique to them is the fact that they are physiologically female and they have a menstrual cycle, right? And so the question then becomes, how well does this research then transpose from a male athlete to a female athlete? And that's where everyone is starting to identify gaps in the research and a need to really dive in and dig deep. So where did this potentially originate from? It's not that I'm a relatively happy and optimistic person. I don't think that there was necessarily a group of people that just say, "Oh, I don't like females, so we're just not going to study them." Again, sometimes we're just a product of our knowledge at the time. And there in the 1970s, there was a number of birth deformities and defects as a result to clinical trials that there was formaldehyde that the women were exposed to, and that really scared everyone. So it's okay. We don't want to impact someone's reproductive system. We don't want to impact the unborn, child. So we're just going to have women in this class of their own. That was in 1977, and if we fast forward to I think 1993 is when there was this like realization that we can't exclude groups based on certain characteristics. We just have to be better, right? Just like Robby very intensely was saying, we just things have to change. Same thing here, right? If we look at 50% of the population, has female physiology, right? So again, based on that information, your thought process or attitude towards this statement might be different now. Women aren't small men. All right, I'm checking my time here. We're still good. Okay. Um, so as far as myself and the team that I work with, we are a coaching company. And kind of our slogan or tagline is getting you ready for the moments that matter in work, sport, and life. I primarily work on the sports side of house, but there's a lot of individuals at our company that also are trying to upgrade females and women's experiences within the corporate side of house, right? And so for us, when we started to look at, okay, we're here to better serve athletes, help them, achieve the moments that matter most to them, right? For us, then it was like looking at, all right, where are we in terms of our own understanding of female physiology? Are we potentially underservicing the female athletes that come to us, right? So part of that is just self-reflection, right? You don't know what you don't know, but it's really important to circle around and always ask, okay, is there a better way? We are a company that likes to collaborate, and so we're very grateful to be a part of this education and hopefully future opportunities with you all and Damon. But we've since 2020 started to ask the question, okay, what does the research say around women's or females' physiology relative to their performance? All right. What's out there? What's supported? From that, okay, where are the blind spots? Where could we potentially, as a company, lean in and collaborate with other experts to figure out, okay, we don't have an answer to this. We better start figuring it out. Okay. And then the kind of the third bucket then is looking at, okay, let's look at what the research is saying and in a very thoughtful way, create athlete experiences that help teach athletes, but also provide them with more informed training around the research. So again, I always self-admit I'm learning every day. Again, I had to kind of let go of some of my social norms around even just talking about the menstrual cycle. Again, just it was a generational thing for me. And as we go through this, hopefully some of my own kind of experiences can help bring this to life. So again, these are just some of the examples of we as a company, what we're trying to do in terms of this women's arc. For us, it's really important working with Stacy Sims and others that if there is research and knowledge that we need to implement today, that we're educating our coaches. And so that has really been the primary push for us is making sure that all our coaches have this information so that all athletes are getting the best information and exposure. We do have a research branch at our company that's really trying to dive into, some of the unanswered questions and leaning into that. We did have a recent pilot where we worked with UFOS. If any of you, I don't know if any of you guys have UFOS shoes or recovery sliders. They are amazing. That's all I'm going to say. If you know, you know. If you don't know, go ahead and research them. But with them, we had a group of female athletes of different sports come in, and it was a really interesting kind of case study where, no, I wouldn't say case study, but just experience where we're still getting our feet wet. We wanted to take our education, not just have it coach facing, but make sure that it actually spoke to the athletes, and then actually took the women through some training experiences to see, okay, depending on where you are in your cycle, this is how you can potentially modify your training. All right, so we're gonna dive in here. Female physiology. As I mentioned before, I'm a very simple person. All right, there's a lot of colors on this slide. All right, where I'm also going to speak a little bit more to the everyone's relationship with their cycle is different. Everyone's cycle is also different. Okay, just because one person's cycle might be 28 days. Someone else's might be shorter or longer. Some people might experience symptoms, others may not. So part of this is just let's understand the construct from just a timeline perspective, number one, but then number two, from a self-reflection perspective, once you can better understand the cycle, you can better understand yourself. Okay, that's really that self-awareness piece is the first and foremost. Okay. Again, very simple person here. We're gonna really think about the menstrual cycle within two different phases, the follicular phase and then the luteal phase. All right. I don't know. Sometimes the words we use, I think there's a way that we can simplify this, but I'm going to move you guys. For some reason, I had you guys at the top of my screen, but you guys are blocking my slide. Okay. All right. So if we look at the follicular phase, again, very simple explanation. Want you to think about this as more as a low hormone phase. All right. From pure simplicity perspective, there's still going to be ebbs and flows of hormones, but relative to the luteal phase, this is what we're going to consider a low hormone phase. All right. So for those of you who are maybe a little bit newer to understanding the menstrual cycle, you're really thinking of this phase as that time from the first day that a female starts their period to the day of ovulation. All right. Again, this can kind of vary, roughly 2 weeks or so. Okay. This is though where the rubber meets the road. All right. So with this phase, there's lower levels of circulating hormones. Um, Oddly enough, again, some of you might be thinking, well, it states here that you likely feel your best, like pushing hard. That's not always the case, right? But again, with our work with Stacy Sims, what we're learning is sometimes what the science and the physiology is saying is potentially different than what we've been told. Okay. Again, this is me storytelling. I was always taught that when you have your period, it's okay. You don't need to do anything, right? Just, sit, grab a water bottle or a heated, water pad or bottle, right? So that, again, that was what I was socialized in, right? Um, but again, if we think and we look at purely just from a physiological perspective, despite how your symptoms might be feeling, yes, you still might be crampy. Um, this is a great opportunity to push things hard from a training perspective. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. Okay, so this is our first phase from the day of the first bleed to ovulation. All right, that's our low hormonal phase, what we call our follicular phase. Oh, oh, let me see if I can. There we go. Okay. Now, if we look at the opposite side of things, all right, now we're looking at our high hormone phase, which is called the luteal phase. All right. So this basically is from that ovulation point, all right, to again that menses or first day of our period. All right. Um, After ovulation, all right, assuming that, the egg isn't fertilized, there's an increase in the level of circulating hormone. All right, this is again for any females on the call to kind of check in with yourself. Again, sometimes we're socialized to think that it's the week of our period that is going to be the crappiest, right? But when I started learning about this and actually journaling and paying attention to how I was feeling throughout the month. It was actually the weeks leading up to my period where I noticed my sleep quality was lower. So I have, all the gizmos and gadgets. I've done Aura Ring, I've done Whoop, all those things. So I'm probably someone that probably, pays a little too much attention to things. Um, but those typically for me were the days where I actually felt like I didn't want to train or I didn't want to push as hard. All right. So again, if we kind of look back to this, kind of oversimplification of things, we have our two phases. All right. The follicular phase, so period to ovulation, circulating hormones are at their lowest. So physiologically, women are potentially more similar to their male counterpart here. This is when, from a physiological perspective and some of the initial research this is when you can make performance gains. So you're actually using your period. This is going to sound super corny, but your period as a superpower, okay, versus this like ant flow that's just a pain in the ass. All right. To then the second part is the luteal phase, so ovulation to period. All right. So this is when hormones are increasing. This notably, when we get into the training section, is where we're going to want to prioritize recovery. Now, recovery does not mean easy. Okay, and we'll kind of talk about the semantics there and the word choice. I'm going to brush over this very quickly because we could probably talk about the impact of different birth control on the menstrual cycle. That could be a whole nother presentation, but it would kind of disservice us if we didn't mention this, understanding that, you know, women on this call, you may be on oral contraceptives or maybe, an IUD, the shot. These things are going to impact your cycle differently. There's a little bit less research done. They call them LARCs. So on the IUD, the implant, or the shot, um, a little less research done, or it's unclear about the effects on performance with this type of birth control. some women just stop menstruating altogether. So then if you're trying to track trends on how you're feeling, that can be a little bit more challenging. That's where, again, talking to your physician, talking to experts in the industry around birth control, and just other than it just having an impact on your cycle, you need to start thinking about how this potentially could be influencing how I'm tracking my performance, or using the power of my cycle to performance. There is more research done on oral contraceptives. This is where things can get a little bit trickier. All right. So everything that I just shared on the previous slides. All right. Um, this is information if someone is not on birth control or non-hormonal birth control. But the way that the pill works, is it's similar to your natural cycling, but the hormonal response is different. So basically, you're just going to flip-flop those two phases. Okay. So if you're not on oral contraceptives, the week of your period up to ovulation, right? If you're not on oral contraceptives, hey, push it hard. Let's bring the intensity. If you are on oral contraceptives, that actually would be the reverse. And we would say, okay, no, you actually have higher hormones fluctuating. From an intensity perspective, we're not going to drive intensity. Okay. So, what I always tell people from a simplicity perspective, let's look at the menstrual cycle not impacted by hormonal birth control. Let's seek to understand that. And then, if you are on hormonal birth control, we're just going to flip the recommendations when we get to the training and other recommendations. Okay. All right, team. I know this is heavy, right? No pun intended, but stick with me here. So, okay, now what? So what? We've been talking about female physiology. All right. Again, for us, just to be really, really clear, I found myself getting super excited with all this knowledge and wanting to share it with every female athlete that I worked with, but understanding that just like anything, when I work with an athlete, they have a choice, right? So for us, it's really important that, yes, we have understanding and knowledge about cycle-based game plans, or what we call game plans essentially are the the practices that we engage in with our athletes, whether it's from a training game plan, a fueling game plan, but it's always an opt-in service, right? So again, not every female is going to want to talk about their period. All right. And so even though we may have knowledge about things, it's at this point always an opt-in service for us. Okay. Um, so to kind of draw some attention to just what I mean by a game plan, what's really exciting is whether you're a coach on this call or you are an athlete, you guys are dialed in. Probably from a very young age, you've included all these components of what we call our EXOS training plan or components. There's training aspects of your microcycle, your macrocycle, your mesocycle. There's most of you are probably engaging fueling experts, registered sports dietitians. You're probably having um, conversations at least around sleep. If not, if you do have insomnia or other issues, you're consulting experts in sleep. For me, the concept of reflection was really new to me. I didn't really understand it. I always thought, what do you mean? I'm just going to sit in a dark room and try to, think about things? No, reflection has come such a long way, and I'm sure Damon and the crew tomorrow are going to dive into that. But it's important, right? If we want to be high achieving and we want to prepare for the moments that matter most, not just today, but tomorrow, reflection does involve self-reflection, self-awareness, right? You do it from a sporting context. From a regulation perspective, this is regulation, reflection, and training are the three areas where there is more research around the menstrual cycle and these components. Regulation, there's moments where you're not going to want to train, but you need to. So how do you upregulate the system to get you ready? There's going to be moments within your game, your play, your training where you're going to need to downregulate. These are again are some components we're going to chat about in a few minutes here. When we talk about daily movement, for us, it's the practice of getting just movement, right? I don't worry too much about that with the professional athletes that I work with because you're accumulating a lot of movement already very intentionally. Whereas with some corporate clients that I work with, we really just have to look at incidental movement. All right, let's park the car here, make a concerted effort to get your 10,000 steps a day. For me, what's more important under this category of daily movement is movement quality. So I'm sure all of you have either athletic trainers, physical therapist, massage therapist, strength coaches, and your skills coaches that are conscious of injuries, whether it's some people coin the term prehab. So, in anticipation of the high demands of your sport, what are the soft tissue, mobility, stability type exercises that you're doing daily to stay well? Or are you coming back from an injury where you have to do some very intentional work throughout the day to make sure that you're still continuing on in your healing process? Okay. So bringing this back to the lens of the cycle. All right. So I mentioned we have our two phases here. All right. We have our follicular phase and we have our luteal phase. So again, the follicular, lower levels of circulating sex hormones. All right. This is truly an opportunity. Again, I'm going to say it again, but it sounds super corny, but you'll remember it. Using your period as a superpower. All right. So this is the opportunity to push hard and to apply higher intensity from a physiological perspective. You might have to get over the mindset of, oh, I've got cramps, right? I've been told not to do anything. Well, no, don't be scared of pushing hard during the week of your period or the week after, because you can make some really great training gains. So whether it's more power work, heavier max effort type work, high speed sprinting or high intensity intervals. This would be an example of, what you could do during that first part of your cycle. With the luteal phase, again, just fact, there's higher levels of circulating hormone. All right. Basically, this doesn't mean you're weak, doesn't mean that you can't handle life or you're too emotional. Okay. What it means from a training perspective is you could still, hit it really, really hard, but your body's ability to respond positively to that high intensity stimulus is just not as great, right? And so often we use the language of, overreaching, right? Versus overtraining. Overtraining, we already know, okay, we've gone, there's been a mismanagement of our load, of our intensities. Um, Overreaching is just a healthier way of saying like we're always progressing, right? What can happen, and this has been my own personal experience when I wasn't familiar with this of the menstrual cycle, um, I would have my training plan, right? I'd have my high intensity days, whether it's from a lifting perspective or from what we call a cardio or energy system development perspective. Again, once I started tracking this stuff, it became more real to me. I started recognizing that during the 2 weeks prior to my cycle, I felt more fatigued. My heart rate, my max heart rate, I was achieving it higher. My resting heart rate was higher, and just generally, I just felt crappy. But again, the mindset that I always had was it's your period, you push past it, right? For me, all it means to me now is that I'm respectful of these two things. So for you guys, training and preparation is a non-negotiable, right? You don't just take weeks off, right? You have a plan. And so when you have a plan, you then are then able to move and shift things around. So for example, right, I now knowing that, I've had personal PRs during my period or the week after, those are the weeks where I know I'm going to get a lot of really great work in from a training perspective. Um, doesn't mean that I'm not doing my skilled or technical work, but during my luteal phase, this is when, again, recovery doesn't just mean like taking it easy. I may be focusing a little bit more on volume versus intensity. I'm potentially still doing the plan, but maybe doing just a little bit less of it, right? For me, this has been a game changer, especially as a newer tennis player who has like really shitty days and really awesome days. I'm just not consistent. Um, that this is tends to be the 2 weeks where I'm still hitting the tennis court, but I'm working more on technical proficiency work. Um, and again, this is about training. All right. The one thing that I would have to say is this does not apply to performance. At the end of the day, if you have a match, you have a match, whether you're the week prior to your menstrual cycle or your period or you're not, right? So there's training, which we're able to put the pieces in the puzzle together. Whereas from a performance perspective, you can't, again, it's your job. You can't say, hey, sorry, coach, I can't participate because I'm in my luteal phase, right? But the more that you're aware of where you are in your cycle, what can you preload from a training perspective or we'll talk a little bit about nutrition here, from a nutrition perspective or from a sleep perspective, so that if you are in that luteal phase and you are in a match or a tournament, you've already filled all these cups to put you in a better position to succeed. Okay. All right. So for those of you that kind of geek out on like strength and conditioning, and again, I'm Damon and team. I'm happy if you want to share this out with the team later on. But for those of you that kind of geek out on rep schemes, like basically, if we look at the top here, whenever you think like 4x5, we know that's higher intensity, right? So we have a very similar full body workout. The top is showing how you might manipulate it for the follicular phase, so the week of your period and the week after. The bottom, right, is how then you could slightly adjust it. So the same focus, but taking into account that you're in that luteal phase where there's more sex hormones circulating, it will prioritize a little bit more volume. Okay. So when we say prioritizing recovery, again, recovery just has a bad rap sometimes because people just do it wrong, right? I mean, everything from a training perspective is intentional, even your recovery. So during the 2 weeks leading up to your period, this is where one way is to manipulate recovery, volume over intensity. So you're still working, you're still getting the job done. Think about reps in reserve, right? So rather than feeling like you're gonna like you have nothing left in the tank, you have 3 or 4 reps in reserve versus from a higher intensity perspective, hey, coach, I'm done. I'm at a 0, or okay, I can squeeze in two more reps. And again, that can apply to any effort, not just from a strength training perspective. Um, it's looking at, okay, train less frequently. So similar program, but is there a way to get it done in 3 days versus 4? Okay. Um, Again, so this is more just for you guys to kind of think about, right? So I've just shared all this information. I've probably overshared with just my mindset and just some of the challenges I've had to just approaching this like subject for myself. We do, just like Robby said, we have to challenge the way things are done. You might be uncomfortable with this even if you do have cramps and you're like, but she said I should push it hard, just try it, right? Be your N. I always tell people, be your N of one. So for me, that means like for me as a coach, I always try things first before I make the recommendation to my athlete. And this is something that I've started to do in my own training for the last year. For me, anecdotally, I have more energy. I have a tendency to overtrain. That's been a problem of mine in the past. That's happening less frequently, especially knowing that I need to be more thoughtful of my intensity and recovery the weeks leading up to my cycle. But then, boom, as soon as day one of my period, all right, I'm hitting it hard from multiple levels. Okay. So again, big takeaway, don't be afraid to try pushing hard during your period. All right. These next few slides will go a little bit quicker, but from a fueling perspective, I'm not a registered dietitian, but I do work with registered dietitian. For us, it's really looking at it as an approach of, someone's fueling first and foremost from a lifestyle perspective. Are we doing the foundational nutrition well? All right. Are we nourishing the body and the mind? Then are there other levers that we need to pull, right, from a performance perspective? All right. Does that include some kind of supplementation? But for us, we're always looking at what, when, and how much in terms of food, hydration, and supplementation, looking at quality of food and quantity, and more importantly, the timing. Um, so again, some of you have more than likely heard the term female athlete triad. The IOC has upgraded that to Red S, so relative energy deficiency in sport. This is an attempt to showcase that the symptoms are much broader and they impact both men and women. All right. So what we're talking about here is some of you are probably aware of, under fueling, overtraining, and under recovery, right? So already you take your annual training schedule, tournaments 52 weeks of the year, right? Holy crap, there is the potential, for bad things to happen if we're not being thoughtful of your fueling or your training regiment, right? But then on top of it, uniquely being female, you have to pay attention to the fact that, okay, how is that also another thing layering to this concept of low energy availability? So kind of the concept here from a low energy availability is if we aren't nourishing our energy enough just to do basic things, right? That's a problem. But then take the life that you guys live as athletes, as coaches, right? Greater demands on the body. When you suffer from low energy availability, the basic life functions, you know, your ability to do those well decrease. So the thought that you'd be able to perform at your highest, those two things aren't computing. So what that means from a fueling perspective, so the follicular phase, so if we look at from your period to ovulation, we're thinking higher intensity work effort. We're going to increase our carbohydrate consumption. Okay. So again, you're still incorporating your fats and your protein, but we're going to bias some more carbohydrates. From a luteal phase perspective, so the weeks leading up to your period, this is actually a fairly catabolic time, right? You want to make sure that you're prioritizing and increasing your protein consumption, okay, particularly after training. All right. Sleep. So sleep, we're going to look at reflection and then regulation. These are three areas that have been researched more in terms of menstrual cycle and the impact on those three things. The biggest takeaway here is you've probably heard the words about sleep hygiene or just sleep etiquette. In general, it's important, right, to think about how you can improve your environment, right, to optimize sleep. What are the detractors? But again, for female physiology, knowing that that luteal phase or the 2 weeks leading up to the period, sleep, just from a hormonal perspective, seems to be disruptive. Being aware of that, again, just gives you more power to look at your environment and maybe you really do love coffee. Maybe especially during that luteal phase, you're avoiding it in the late afternoon. Um, so from a reflection perspective, right? It's not like, oh, woe is me, I have my period, life sucks. No, from a reflection perspective, it's um, there's an increase in just general fatigue, anxiety within those 2 weeks of the period, right? And so that's again, society has said, oh, well, you have like PMS, right? Well, that's unfair. Okay. I can't control what my body is doing, right? But being aware of it, right? So something that you may do to help just, visualize your match, right, is very intentional reflection. Knowing that you might be a little bit more anxious or fatigued around those 2 weeks, maybe your reflection practice, you're doing more of it, right? Just to help combat those anxious feelings or fatigue. From just a regulation perspective, right? During that luteal phase, right? Or the 2 weeks prior to your menstrual cycle, especially if you have a match or an important tournament, you're going to need to up-regulate yourself. And so I'm sure many of you, along with your coaches, are engaging in different breath work. All right. Wrapping up here, so this is one of the areas that there needs to be more research. There's some conflicting evidence about the risk of injury throughout the menstrual cycle. So many of you have maybe heard, like I think someone told me this in high school, oh, just be careful if you're playing soccer during your period, you're more likely to get hurt. All right, as a young person or athlete, like I mean, what do you do with that information? Do you not do anything, right? But that, there has been suggestions that there are an increase in soft tissue injuries during that follicular phase, so period to ovulation. Could that be related to hormones? Potentially, or is it okay if you weren't knowledgeable of how to adapt your training? As I mentioned to you, I kind of fell into this category, so it kind of, rang truth for me. I would always, I strained my calf or I pulled a muscle here or I tore something, the week of my period, right? Quite honestly, what I believe, for me was a big driver in that was the fact that I wasn't being respectful of my training plan during the luteal phase, where even though I felt tired, felt fatigued, I was sore, I just kept pushing it, and pushing it because I've been taught not to use your period as an excuse. So again, more research has to be done. And so I think this would be an interesting area to continue to dive into. Um, so we have all our different training components. What you can do today to help you tomorrow, right? And these kind of fall in the recommendations of what we would do first. Avoid low energy availability, whether you're female or male, right? So again, speak with your dietitians, your coaches about this, okay? Two, if you're not cycle tracking, start cycle tracking. Know where you are to date, and then you can start to put into test some of these concepts that I've shared with you. From a fueling perspective, again, just that simple kind of thought process of, okay, during the follicular phase, I'm going to prioritize carbohydrates. During my luteal phase, I'm going to focus a little bit more on protein. Again, I would always do this with supervision. Start having a conversation with those that support you. Sleep hygiene, just in general, everyone can do this better. But then from a training perspective, this is the one that even though we spent the most time talking about, just small adjustments because, again, you guys have been doing things a certain way for a long period of time, right? For me, we don't want to just, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, hey, everything has to change. So that's interestingly why we've placed that as the fifth kind of thing to lean into, focus on 1 through 4, and then, talk with your coach, look at your micro, meso, macro cycling, and start to, maybe put some of this adjustment of high intensity versus endurance work to the test. You can take a screenshot of this. This like just nicely summarizes everything that we talked about. Again, our language is game plan. So from a training, fueling, sleep, reflection, regulation, and just daily movement, just the key takeaways. So I'll give you a moment just to look at that, take a snapshot. But team, again, really appreciate this opportunity. For me, if there's anything to take away from this is there's a lot of information out there and it's a really exciting time. Don't get overwhelmed, right? Part of this was just let's get everyone to the same start line. Minimally, let's start having the conversation. Start, though, having those conversations with your performance team, the team that supports you, because at the end of the day, we want you to, do your best. And if there's something to this, recognizing that you have unique physiology because you are a female, let's see where we can lean into that for you and help you succeed. So, thank
Jenny,
you.
th Jenny, that was amazing. Thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation about this physiological fact, as you say. I think the last we checked, there was two female coaches for the top 100 players. So a lot of male coaches working with female athletes. And I know I hear a lot about how they can be most effective with their athletes. This is gold in a lot of ways. And as you say, just the start, I'm drawn to what Robby said at the beginning. We are the least advanced that we will ever be, and we're moving forward. And with that, mindful of time, I wanted to segue to Christy so she can kind of bring us home, sharing something that I think is a really exciting new way to approach self-awareness. And so, Christy, take it away. And there were a few questions, and so, Christy, why don't you go, till close to 11:30, and then we'll circle back with some of these final questions that you had um, to wrap it up. Okay.
Fabulous. Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. What an amazing opportunity to be in front of this panel and of course, all of the attendees. So thank you to the PTPA. Just to kind of take a step back, and I promise I'll get through the slides pretty expeditiously. My journey in sport started on basketball courts in New York, New Jersey. Through a series of events, I got injured. I wish I had, the insight. The mindset was no pain, no gain, push through the pain, but what is good pain or right pain? What is wrong pain? And there wasn't transparency in that. So I shifted to my second love. I still do play basketball. I do play tennis, which is technology for good, or the creation of technology for good. So as Damon highlighted, focused on how do we democratize access to mobility. And that shifted, though consistently, how do we start to democratize access to health, wellness, and performance insights? So having heard Robby, talk about the game is changing, as is the player, and then Jennifer nicely highlighting Dr. Stacy Stimm's quote, we're not little men. How do we be better? And so at Da Vinci, the goal has been to really leverage technology, understand the gaps. For me, I saw the gaps when I played sport as an athlete, as a basketball player. Also saw it, when I was a technologist, had a miscarriage, didn't understand. People talk about miscarriages, but what they don't talk about is, how do you reach equilibrium both socially, mentally, and physically afterward? And so left Fortune 5 to really lean into how do we be better? How do we have a companion in our ear at our fingertips, which we all have today, but use it for good and democratize that access for good from a wellness, health, and performance standpoint. So I can't see the time, Damon, but keep me honest here, and let me know when there's like 3 minutes left and I can accelerate.
Will do.
So thank you. So 4 billion females truly lack personalized wellness. And, the statistic that you can kind of see here, if you take one out of all of these, is 100% are going to go through perimenopause. Oh, and by the way, statistically, some females actually start that in their mid 30s. So as we take from Robby, hey, the average age of, the player is leaning into 30s or late 20s, early 30s. Truly, the physiology and your hormones are actually different than your teens or early 20s. Also, 10% of the population have chronic conditions. So endometriosis, I think I saw a question in the chat on PCOS. We'll defer to later to chat about that. But one statistic that holds true is 85% of female athletes have not received education about female health. So the call to action when it relates to training, and in particular, personalized, individualized training that's optimized for your personalized wellness, those are key, right? And we're endeavoring to do that through engagement, education, and these individualized training plans that are balancing load, recovery, and stress. So it's also important to note that 6% of sports science research, only 6% has been dedicated to the female physiological body. And 60 to about 80% of these athletes highlight that their menstrual cycle is in fact impacting their performance, and that's how they feel. And 76% aren't actually talking about it with coaches because we have not yet normalized on day 1 or day 28, or talking in particular from a phase standpoint of follicular or luteal. Jenny nicely put, we're not small men. The benchmark, we're not little men. The benchmark for preparation, medical, and recovery methods is actually predicated on not just a male, but a particular sized male. And twice as many girls are dropping out of sports compared to boys during puberty for a variety of reasons that Jenny mentioned. So what is a solution? How do we be better? At Da Vinci, we believe that you should engage through community engagement. This is both working with coaches and athletes hand in glove. You're learning, but as you're learning, you're actually understanding not only where you are in your cycle, but what are the vital signs, what are the biomarkers that are being ingested for the goal that you have in mind. And lastly, how are you acting? What are your training plans, and how does that reflect your holistic, individualized health and wellness journey? So there's mental, there's social, and there's physical. So what we have in our platform, we're effectively the body intelligence layer or body API. So whatever wearable you're wearing today, we integrate with that wearable. We happen to have an activity tracker of our own, but I'll defer that to a later conversation. And what we're providing is actionable insights and fitness plans. And in essence, a companion so that when you're about to do an activity, you could say, hey, Da Vinci, what heart rate zone should I be in when I'm on day 5? And because Da Vinci has been collecting data as, from your Apple Watch, et cetera, we can go ahead and almost create that, digital human twin or human digital twin of you and project into the future of what that might look like in terms of your performance and efficacy. So with Da Vinci, we're encouraging you to push the limits. You can share those routines. And really at the heart of this is, how do you pay it forward? How do you inspire the next generation of female athletes? With our platform, not only are you learning about yourself, about how to push limits, about how to improve your training load, your recovering, maybe your mental health awareness through breathworks, but we encourage you limit what you share, but you can share those training activities to kind of inspire the next generation of tennis athletes or athletes or the everyday athlete. You can share your nutrition habits, and you can engage emotionally and empower through a collective wisdom. So one of our featured partners, this is actually real data from swimmers, females in particular, where we can work hand in glove with the coach to assess individualized performance. So for example, here, the curves that you're saying, I know there's a lot of data here, but across a series of 8 to 10 weeks, you're increasing or decreasing plus or minus 20%, not at a given instant, but over time, the training load for each week. So the assessment is, how are the variations in your training load for your goal for that peak event how are you susceptible to those deviations? And through simulation, by creating this human digital twin, you're able to see an improvement in about 8%, which can be the difference between getting the medal or not getting the medal. And this particular is data from swimmers competing at a competitive level. So that's what we're endeavoring to do. Yes, it's important to understand the female physiology. In addition to that, it's what is the individualized performance and how are you being coached and how can that coachability be adopted or adapted as a function of time based on the metrics that you're recording. So the key is you can optimize your training, you're getting those actionable insights, and to some extent, you're endeavoring to assess risks. Remember, there's not a lot of data on female athletes. Only 6% has been dedicated. So we're living in a very much a data-starved environment so that we can see and assess trends over time. And this is for swimming. We would love to do this for tennis as well. So in summary, Da Vinci works with you and your coach to optimize individualized performance, or it can become your digital coach, right? To create those individualized plans so that you learn, you engage. And lastly, it can create a revenue stream for you as a tennis player as you're really empowering the next generation through, your plans, the ways that you get motivated, and so forth. So I'm part of an amazing team. Feel free to reach out through Damon to engage with us, and join our movement. Right? She believed she could, so she did it. And we have kinesiology experts, we have athletes, current athletes, and also former athletes, and some folks on our medical committee that we work with and we chat with. So delighted to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, and hopefully I'm on time, Damon.
No, you nailed it, Christy. Thank you so much. Such an exciting project and product that you've put out into the world. It's sort of mind-boggling to think about only 6% research on women in sport, and also just the fact that in your model here, the ability for individual athletes to have that kind of customized, specialized agency over their training. And as I mentioned, coaches in the relationship between coaches and players, having more of this specificity would just be so valuable for them to be able to construct training. Thank you so much for being here, and also we'll be happy to support and I can be a liaison for anyone who's interested in Christy's work with Da Vinci. Just to kind of circle back to a few of these questions as I'm mindful of time and we're wrapping up. The PCOS question and other reproductive system conditions. How does the protocol stay the same, or do things change for these athletes? And maybe open to Christy and Jenny on that one.
Yeah, I'll take a stab first. So this is also where, I'm always very transparent with you, right? This is where we're growing and learning. Um, our there are lifestyle modifications that can certainly help symptoms. This is a medical diagnosis, and so we refer to or defer to the experts, right? And so any kind of lifestyle modifications or like training considerations, we recommend, discussing with your medical provider. And again, this is an area that not everyone has, a minimalistic like period with like no symptoms. Biggest kind of takeaway from our presentation is, this is what we're leaning into, assuming A, B, C, and D, where there's a lot that we still need to learn and dive into. And so right now, our recommendation is when we do work with athletes who are aware of their conditions, or through this kind of cycle tracking and potentially using something like Da Vinci, uncovering something that is an issue that they just historically ignored, is always then going back to your medical team. So I don't know, Christy or Robby, if you have additional feedback or thoughts around that.
Go ahead, Christy.
I mean, other than +1, Jennifer, I think you hit the nail on the head. We just don't have a lot of data, right? When it comes to chronic conditions, as it relates to, first of all, as it relates to the general population, right? And so now if you say, okay, combine that with women in sport, right, it gets even further narrow, right? 6%. So I think we're actively learning, and because it's a chronic condition, right, defer to a lot of the MDs, GYNs, and so forth. Robby? Yeah.
I think in general, we tend to use data to try and answer questions. I think we should use data to ask better questions. I think we should use scenarios like PCOS and other conditions that are unique to individuals, um, and try and ask questions as to how it's really impacting their performance or their life. I don't think we do a really good job of understanding like how does it actually impact what you're trying to do. And this is where the subspecialty of sports medicine, how many sports medicine professionals work with enough tennis players or enough tennis players with PCOS to answer those specific questions? So as opposed to trying to answer things, let's try and ask better questions. And I think that that's something that I always try and do is really understand what the individual is going through, because that's how you actually kind of lead them and get them to open up and get them to tell you what's going on, and then you can tie it back over time. But it's about, in my role, and I think Damon's role too with the PTPA, it's really about establishing that relationship. I think the best outcomes that I've had with any patients here have been the ones that I've been able to continue to connect with over time. It's not about just giving them an answer and, kicking them to the wind. It's about staying connected with them and following up with them. So just because you solve PCOS for the day or you help answer a question, it's really about staying with them on a journey. And that's hopefully where I think AI and some other things can do to help maintain that connectivity.
Yeah, well said, Robbie. And I'm just again mindful of time. I just wanted to close the loop on that question that was posed earlier on energy consumption with the different surfaces between clay, grass, hard quartz. Is there some data on that?
There is some good data to suggest that, injury risk is higher on hard courts, not unexpected, but it really is different as we transition between the different surfaces. That's when we see a unique risk to players, particularly on the lower extremity. So when we go from, hard courts back to clay, and then really clay onto grass, and then grass onto hard courts, we see those transition periods being some of the highest risk. But again, like we're looking at all the different factors related to tournaments, and the condensing of the schedule in a lot of tournaments is really a major flaw as well.
Hmm.
So, to really answer the question, I think from an energy consumption perspective, the points obviously take longer on clay, but the injury risk is higher on hard court, and it's the transition point that you should really optimize all of the different things that you can to transition safely.
Hmm. Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists and our attendees for kicking us off for this 3-day summit. It was excellent. So much information. I learned a lot. Thank you all. Vedika, you'll send a follow-up email.
Yes,
Thanks for
and the
everybody for
recording.
joining and the recording.
Thank you,
Perfect.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Hello, hello. You're on mute.
How are
Hi,
you?
Elizabeth. It's Vedika. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for hopping on. Sorry, we just finished our previous session and it
No,
ran very, very long.
that's okay. I think Kelly had joined early, so apologies if that was
Oh no.
unfortunately time. She's going to rejoin now. Just a quick one is that it's notified me that you're recording, but we've talked to Kayla about how these can't